The scream tore through the howling storm like a blade of pure, undiluted fury. It was not a sound of fear, nor of pain begging for mercy. It was a war cry forged in the heart of betrayal, and it stopped Kalen Frostfang in his tracks. For 100 years, as the unchallenged Alpha King of the Northern Reach, he had heard every shade of agony the world could produce. But this was different. This was a soul refusing to break. Rain sheeted down his bare shoulders, ice cold and relentless, as he stood on the jagged cliffs that marked his kingdom's edge. His eyes, the color of a winter twilight, narrowed. The sounds had come from the east, from the Shadowwood. That forest was under the dominion of the Sovereign Conclave, a nest of corrupt elders who governed with whispered lies and public executions. It was not his territory, not his problem. Yet that scream echoed in his bones. Lightning fractured the sky, and in its stark white flash, he saw them. Torches, moving like malevolent fireflies at the tree line. Figures forming a circle, dragging a smaller, struggling form into its center. A ritual, a conclave judgment. His every instinct, honed by a century of ruthless rule and self-imposed isolation, screamed at him to turn away. The conclave dealt with their own. Interference meant war. But something about the raw defiance in that cry, now silenced into a tense, waiting quiet, made the wolf beneath his skin snarl in protest. He moved. The distance that would take a normal wolf half a day to cover vanished beneath Kalen's preternatural speed. He became a shadow among shadows, reaching the ancient groaning trees of the Shadowwood in mere minutes. He slipped into the darkness of a monstrous, twisted oak, his presence vanishing into the forest's own malevolent aura. He expected brutality. He expected the conclave's cold, ceremonial cruelty. But what he did not expect was the vice that tightened around his own chest, a feeling so foreign he almost didn't recognize it. It was a pull, a resonance. Below, in a clearing carved with glowing, wrong-looking runes, the scene unfolded. Conclave guards, faces hidden behind grim masks, shoved a young woman to her knees in the mud. She was slight, her dress torn, a dark trail of blood mixing with the rain on her temple. But her head was high, and her eyes, they were not the gold or brown of common wolves. They were pure, piercing silver, blazing with a light that seemed to come from within, reflecting the torch flames not with fear, but with fury. A seer in blood-red robes stepped forward, her voice a hollow chant. The Shadowwood shall judge what the pack cannot bear. Let the ancient roots purify the corruption. But Kalen saw the truth in an instant. The runes were not for judgment. They were a cage, a seal. This was no trial. It was an execution dressed in holy words. The silver-eyed woman's gaze swept the circle of onlookers. It landed on a broad-shouldered man who stared fixedly at the ground, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like stone. Then it found a woman with golden braids who hugged herself and turned her face away. The betrayed whisper that left the kneeling girl's lips was stolen by the wind, but Kalen read the names on her mouth. Alara, Ronan. The golden-braided woman, Alara, flinched but did not look. The man, Ronan, remained a statue of shame. The seer raised her hands. The rune circle ignited with emerald fire, sealing the girl inside a ring of magic and flame. The guard scrambled back as if she were plague-ridden. "Step deeper, tainted one," the seer commanded. "Let the forest decide your worth." For a heartbeat, the girl just knelt there, rain plastering her dark hair to her pale skin, blood and water painting her face. Then she did something that made Kalen's breath catch in his throat. She laughed. It was a sound devoid of joy, dark and bitter with understanding. It was the sound of a puzzle piece finally clicking into a horrifying picture. She pushed herself to her feet, swaying but straightening her spine. "You're not testing me," she said, her voice clear and cutting through the rain. "You're feeding me to it because you're terrified of what you made me forget." Without another glance at her betrayers, she turned and she walked. Not stumbled, not ran. She walked, head high, shoulders back, straight into the deeper, waiting darkness of the Shadowwood. The moment she crossed the tree line, Kaylin felt it, a physical jolt like the strike of a silenced bell deep in his core. The air shimmered. Resonance. The rarest of phenomena, spoken of in legends. It happened when two lines of ancient primordial power met. This broken, bleeding girl carried a bloodline that sang to his own, a lineage that should have been erased from the world. Why was a wolf with elder blood being tossed like refuse into a death forest to die quietly? The conclave members dispersed quickly, fear on their faces as the rune fires died. The clearing fell silent, save for the drumming rain. And Kaylin Frostfang, the Alpha King who had sworn never to interfere again after his own world was burned by betrayal, stood in the shadows. His wolf growled, a relentless, demanding sound in his mind. Find her, know her. He looked at the point where she had vanished. He had felt nothing but icy control for a century. Now he felt curiosity and a flicker of something dangerously like hope. He stepped over the boundary into conclave land. The forest welcomed him with a groan of ancient timber. He followed the fading, pulsing echo of that impossible resonance, a beacon in the dark. He found her an hour later, collapsed by a black water stream, trying to wash the blood from her face with trembling hands. Bruises bloomed across her arms like storm clouds. Her breathing was shallow, cracked ribs, but she was alive, and she was singing. A low, haunting melody, notes weaving through the predatory whispers of the forest. It was an old lullaby, one her own grandmother had sung, a song to calm frightened pups during thunderstorms. In the underbrush, shadows with glinting eyes circled, forest wraiths drawn to weakness, but the song confused them. This prey was not acting like prey. Kaylin moved. He didn't fully shift, but let just enough of his power ripple out, the dominance of an apex predator, the silent claim of a king. The wraiths scattered like smoke. The girl's head snapped up, silver eyes wide and exhausted, locked on his twilight gaze. And the resonance slammed into him again, a tidal wave of raw, suppressed power. It was like standing in the heart of a silent lightning storm. She tried to scramble back, failed, a gasp of pain escaping her. "Who are you?" Her voice was a raw scrape of sound. Kaylin approached slowly, hands open and visible. "A king who heard a queen's defiance," he said, his voice a low rumble, "and who wants to know why a wolf with the blood of legends in her veins was thrown to the shadows to die quietly." Her eyes widened, then hardened with a suspicion born of a lifetime of hurt. "You felt it? The pull?" "I did, which means you know what I am." Her bitter laugh was a hollow thing. "I don't know what I am. They made sure of that." Her eyes began to drift closed, exhaustion winning. Kaylin made the decision that would shatter his century of peace. He knelt and gathered her into his arms with a care that surprised him. She was light and cold and trembling. "You are not dying tonight," he stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Because if the conclave went to such lengths to erase you, you must be the most dangerous thing to walk this earth in 300 years. He looked down at her pale, blood-streaked face. "And I want to see what happens when you finally wake up." Her silver eyes, heavy-lidded, met his. Confusion. A flicker of something that might have been hope. Then darkness took her. Cradling the mysterious, powerful stranger, Kalen Frostfang turned his back on the Shadowwood and carried his catalyst for war home. Kalen's secret mountain keep was a place of stark silence and forgotten memories. He laid the girl on a bed of furs before the hearth, the firelight dancing over her still form and the sickly green glow of the runes carved into her skin. Suppression marks, old, layered, malicious. They pulsed like a poison heartbeat, keeping the magnificent power he'd sensed locked in a deep, dark well. As he cleaned the mud and blood from her face, revealing sharp, elegant features, the resonance hummed between them, a constant, low-level thrum. It was unsettling. It was alive. He was studying the intricate, cruel scarring when a tome on a high shelf seemed to call to him. It was bound in what looked like aged wolf hide, its pages thick with the dust of decades. The Bloodline Chronicle, a record his family had hidden from the Conclave's purges. With a sense of grim purpose, he brought it to the table. The script was ancient, the family trees sprawling and complex. He traced lines, looking for silver-eyed markers, for notations of first song or root whisperer, old names for lost gifts. His fingers stopped on a name, Ulrich the Stone Singer, and followed a thin, almost erased branch down, through generations thought extinct. His blood went cold. Lyra, daughter of Soren, last of the direct line of Ulrich, marked, eyes of moonfall, status, purged. But the date of the purge was 20 years ago. This girl in his furs was no more than 22. A child could have survived, hidden. He looked from the page to her face. Not just elder blood, first blood, descendant of the primordial alphas, the ones who sang the forest into being and walked with the moon as a companion. The Conclave hadn't just suppressed a powerful wolf, they had buried a living relic, an heir to a throne they had massacred everyone to steal. The door to the keep burst open without a sound. Kalen was on his feet in an instant, standing between the bed and the entrance, a silent snarl on his lips. In the doorway stood not Conclave hunters, but a figure from his past he never thought to see again. An old woman, hunched over a gnarled staff, her eyes milky with age, but piercing in their intensity. Grandmother Yara, a keeper of histories, a seer who had vanished the night his family was betrayed. "Kalen Frostfang," she rasped, her voice like dry leaves. "You have taken a world of trouble into your home." "You should not know of this place, Yara," Kalen said, his voice dangerously soft. "The stones told me. The roots shivered with the awakening." She shuffled forward, her gaze fixed on Lyra. "So it is true. The last seed of the first tree did not wither." She reached a trembling hand towards Lyra's forehead, but stopped short. "The binds are failing. She is dreaming, and her dreams are shaking the foundations of the world." "What do you mean?" Kalen asked, his kingly composure fraying. "Your suppression did not make her weak, boy. It made her a pressure cooker. All those years of power, of instinct, of memory, they were not destroyed, they were damned. And now the dam has cracks." Yara's milky eyes found his. "When she wakes, it will not be a gentle stirring. It will be an eruption, and the Conclave will feel it. They are already coming." As if summoned by her words, a howl, thin and cold, echoed up from the distant valley, a Conclave scout call. Kalen's twilight eyes hardened into chips of glacier ice. Let them come. "Foolish pride," Yara snapped. "You cannot fight the entire Conclave Guard alone, not with a volatile primal queen at your side who does not yet know how to blink." "Then what would you have me do?" Kalen's growl vibrated in the stone room. "Teach her," Yara said simply. Before the storm hits, show her the first note of her song, or her awakening will destroy this mountain, and you with it." Another howl, closer this time. Kaelin made a decision. "You will stay. Guard her. If they breach the lower passes, take her through the crystal caves. And you?" Kaelin allowed a feral smile to touch his lips. "I will remind the conclave why they have feared the Frostfang line for a century." He strode to the door, pausing only to look back at Lyra's peaceful, sleeping face. The resonance pulled at him, a physical ache to stay. He hardened his heart. Survival first. Outside, the storm had ceased, leaving a brittle, starless night. On the wind, he could smell them. Iron, fear musk, and the cloying scent of conclave magic. They were moving up the switchback trails, a dozen strong. Hunters. Elite. Kaelin did not wait for them to reach the keep. He descended like winter itself, silent and deadly. The first hunter died without a sound, his neck snapped by a shadow that passed too fast to see. The second cried out a warning that was cut short. The hunt was on, but Kaelin was not the prey. He was the landscape. He was the sudden drop, the hidden crevasse, the avalanche waiting to be triggered. He picked them off in the darkness, using the terrain as his weapon. He was not just fighting, he was sending a message, written in blood and silence. "This territory is mine. My ward is mine. Touch either, and you will not leave." He took down 8 before the remaining 4, including their leader, managed to corner him on a narrow ledge overlooking a dizzying drop. The leader, a hulking brute named Vorlak, sneered. The mighty Alpha King reduced to skulking in the rocks for a corrupted bitch. Kaelin said nothing. He simply shifted, not the partial change he used for speed, but the full, terrifying transformation of an alpha in his prime, on his land. Bones realigned, muscles surged, fur the color of a midnight storm rippled over his expanding form. He towered over them, his eyes twin violet suns in the darkness. Vorlak's bravado evaporated. The other hunters stumbled back. "The girl," Kaelin's voice was a rock slide, "is under the protection of the Northern Crown. Your conclave's laws are ash on my wind. Carry that back to your masters." He expected them to flee. Instead, Vorlak reached into his cloak and pulled out a small obsidian orb. "We have our own protections, Frostfang." He smashed the orb at his feet. A wave of nullifying magic erupted, a conclave specialty designed to disrupt a wolf's connection to its beast. Kaelin felt a jarring disconnect, his shift wavering. It was like being plunged into icy water. In that moment of instability, Vorlak lunged, a silver-coated blade aimed for Kaelin's heart. Kaelin twisted, but the blade scored a deep gash across his side. Pain, sharp and shocking, flared. He roared, more in fury than agony, and backhanded Vorlak with enough force to send the hunter sailing over the ledge. His scream faded into the abyss. The nullifying magic faded as quickly as it came. The remaining hunters, leaderless, finally broke and ran. Kaelin shifted back, clutching his bleeding side. The wound was deep, but not mortal. He turned his gaze upward, towards the keep. The fight was over, but the warning was delivered, and he had a more pressing concern. Back in the keep, Grandmother Yara was chanting over Lyra, whose body was now glowing with a faint, unstable silver light. The suppression runes were dying. "She is fighting the bindings in her sleep," Yara said, her voice strained. Lyra's back arched off the furs, a silent scream on her lips. The silver light pulsed, and a single perfect crystal of ice formed on the ceiling above her, then shattered. Kaelin approached, ignoring his own wound. He knelt beside her and did the only thing he could think of. He placed his hand over the oldest, darkest rune on her collarbone. He poured his own power into it, not to suppress, but to soothe, to channel. A king's strength offered as a guide rail, not a cage. "Easy," he murmured, his voice rough. "The fight is done. Your power is not your enemy. It is your right. but now is not the time. Slowly, the silver glow receded. The runes stabilized, though they looked more brittle than ever. Lyra's breathing evened out. She settled, her head turning slightly towards the warmth of his hand. Grandmother Yara watched, a strange, sad smile on her wrinkled face. The bond strengthens, even in silence. You have given her an anchor in the storm of her own soul, Kaylin. Be certain you are ready to hold that line when the true tempest comes. Kaylin looked at Lyra's face, finally peaceful, and then at the blood seeping through his fingers from his wound. The conclave had drawn first blood. The war was no longer a possibility. It had begun, and at the center of it all slept a queen who did not yet know her own name, connected by an invisible thread to a king who had forgotten how to hope. Lyra awoke to the scent of pine smoke, stone, and dried herbs, and blood. Her own memories rushed back. The circle, the runes, Alara's turned back, Ronan's shame, the walking into darkness. Then, the king, the man with eyes like a winter twilight who had pulled her from the edge of death. She sat up sharply, pain lancing through her ribs. The room was simple, sturdy. A fire crackled, and sitting in a chair by the hearth, sharpening a long blade with a steady, rhythmic motion, was him, Kaylin Frostfang. His shirt was off, a stark white bandage wrapped around his torso, stained faintly with red. The sight of the Alpha King, wounded in his own sanctuary, was more shocking than any conclave ritual. "You're awake." His voice was a low rumble, not unfriendly, but layered with immense gravity. He didn't stop his task. "Where is the old woman?" Lyra asked, her voice less raw now. "Gathering supplies. She will return." He set the blade down and finally looked at her. The intensity of his gaze was a physical weight. "How much do you remember?" "Everything and nothing." She pulled the furs closer, suddenly conscious of her torn dress, her scars. "They called me tainted, corrupted. From the time I was a child, the wards around our village would hum when I passed. Animals would grow still. My own father couldn't look me in the eye." She touched the rune on her collarbone. "Then the markings started. Every time I felt a surge, a strange warmth, they would add another, until I felt nothing at all, just cold and hollow." Kaylin was silent for a long moment. "They were not containing corruption, Lyra. They were caging a heritage. You are first blood, a descendant of the original Alphas." The words meant nothing to her. They were just more labels. "What does that mean?" "It means," said Grandmother Yara, shuffling in with a basket of roots, "that the conclave built their empire on the graves of your ancestors. Your very existence is a threat to their lie. Your power isn't a flaw, it's a birthright they have spent centuries murdering to suppress." Lyra felt the world tilt. All those years of being told she was wrong, a mistake, it was all a deliberate, terrified lie. "My pack, Alara, Ronan, they knew?" Yara's face was grim. "Some suspected. The conclave would have promised them safety, status, in exchange for their compliance in your management. Fear is a potent weapon." A cold, hard knot formed in Lyra's stomach. Betrayal wasn't just personal, it was systemic. She was a political prisoner in her own skin. "The bindings are failing," Kaylin stated, rising to his feet. "Your power responds to threat, to strong emotion. You cannot control what you do not understand. We must begin your training, now." "Training?" Lyra laughed weakly. "I can barely stand, and you're wounded." "A scratch," he dismissed. "And your body is stronger than you know. The first blood is resilience incarnate." He extended a hand. "The forest is the best teacher. It remembers your kin." Hesitantly, Lyra took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and the moment their skin touched, the resonance hummed the life, a comforting, terrifying vibration between them. He pulled her up, steadying her when she swayed. They walked out of the keep into a crisp morning. The mountain air was thin and clean. Below, the shadow wood was a dark green smear, but here the trees were tall pines and ancient silver-barked sentinels. "Close your eyes," Kaylin instructed, standing beside her. "Don't try to feel for your wolf. She is buried too deep. Feel for the forest. Listen." Lyra closed her eyes. At first, there was just the wind, the distant cry of a hawk. Then, beneath it, she began to sense a vibration, a slow, deep pulse coming from the earth itself, the heartbeat of the mountain. "Good," Kaylin murmured, his voice closer than she expected. "Now, don't reach for it. Just hum the song you sang in the shadow wood." Self-conscious but trusting, Lyra began the old lullaby. As the notes left her lips, something miraculous happened. The vibration in the earth responded. The nearest silver-barked tree shivered, and a cascade of glowing pollen, like captured moonlight, drifted down around them. A family of snowfinches hidden in the branches ceased their chatter and turned their heads towards her in unison. Her eyes flew open. I didn't do anything." "You are something," Kaylin corrected, his twilight eyes watching the phenomenon. "You are a note in the song of this world. The forest recognizes its composer." He pointed to a large moss-covered boulder. "Now, place your hand on the stone. Do not command, ask." Lyra approached the boulder. She placed her palm on the cool, damp moss. She thought not of moving it, but of the stone's own nature, its age, its patience, its strength. She hummed again, a different, deeper note. The ground trembled, not violently, but subtly. The moss retreated where her hand touched, and the stone itself seemed to soften just at the surface, molding slightly around her fingertips, before settling back. She snatched her hand back, heart pounding. "That's impossible." "It is your truth," Kaylin said. First Bloods were not just wolves, they were shapers, speakers, the bridge between beast and world. His expression grew severe. "This is why the Conclave fears you. This power, unchecked, could raise mountains or still earthquakes. In the wrong hands, or in panicked, untrained ones, it could cause calamity." The weight of it crashed down on her. This wasn't just about being strong in a fight. This was a responsibility of tectonic proportions. "I don't want this," she whispered. "That choice was stolen from you the day you were born," Kaylin said, not unkindly. "The only choice left is what you do with it now. Hide again, let them recapture and silence you forever, or learn, master it, and decide what kind of queen you will be." "Queen," the word echoed. She looked at her hands, hands that could whisper to stones. She thought of Alara's betrayal, of the Conclave's cruelty. A spark of that old defiance ignited, fanned by this new, terrifying knowledge. "Teach me," she said, her silver eyes hardening like polished metal. Their training began in earnest. It was not about brute force. It was about sensitivity, listening, harmony. Kaylin, to her surprise, was a patient teacher. He guided her to feel the flow of energy in a stream, to understand the language of the wind in the pines. He taught her control by having her calm a startled deer with a melody, or encourage a stubborn sapling to straighten with a coaxing thought. The resonance between them became a tool. He could sense when her power spiked towards panic, and would place a steadying hand on her shoulder, his own calm presence a buffer. She, in turn, began to sense his moods, the flicker of tension when he thought of the Conclave, the deep, quiet pulse of his connection to his territory. One afternoon, as she practiced directing the fall of leaves in a gentle spiral, a piercing headache spiked behind her eyes. Visions, sharp and painful, flashed, stone towers burning, wolves with silver eyes like hers falling before shadowy figures, a great tree with roots of light being hewn down. She cried out, collapsing to her knees. Kaylin was at her side instantly. "Lyra! It's Memories, she gasped. Not mine. My ancestors. The purge. They're breaking through. Grandmother Yara hurried over. The bindings are crumbling. Her heritage is flooding in. She must be grounded or she will be lost in the echoes of the past. Kalen acted without thought. He pulled Lyra against his chest, wrapping his arms around her. He didn't speak. Instead, he did what she had done in the forest. He hummed. A deep, steady, kingly note that spoke of mountains that could not be moved, of winters that were survived, of a presence that was here and now. Slowly, the violent visions receded, pushed back by the solid reality of his heartbeat against her ear, the scent of frost and pine that was uniquely him. The resonance between them flared, not as a shock, but as a lifeline, tethering her to the present. When the last echo faded, she was trembling but clear-eyed. She didn't pull away immediately. The anchor he provided felt necessary. "Thank you," she breathed. He released her, his usual mask of impassivity back in place, but his eyes held a warmth she hadn't seen before. "The past has its claims," he said quietly, "but your fight is in the present. We must focus." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of fire and violet, a new sound reached them. Not a howl, the clear, carrying note of a war horn, one, then another, answering from different points in the valley below. Kalen's face turned to stone. He moved to the cliff edge, Lyra and Yara following. Below, at the very border where the mountain met the shadowwood, an army was gathering. Ranks of conclave guards in polished obsidian armor, seers in their blood-red robes, and at the front a palanquin carried by 8 massive wolves. Upon it sat the high seer herself, Valerius, her face hidden by a golden raven mask. The horn blew again, a demand, a summons. Kalen Frostfang looked from the army to Lyra, whose silver eyes were wide, reflecting the dying light. The time for hidden training was over. "The conclave," he said, his voice the calm before the avalanche, "has come to collect their lost weapon." He turned his twilight gaze to her. "The question is, Lyra of the First Blood, are you ready to show them she is now a queen?" The war horn's echo died, leaving a silence more threatening than any sound. From their high perch, Lyra watched the conclave host assemble like a stain of ink and polished darkness at the foot of Kalen's mountain. The sheer number of them stole her breath. This was not a hunting party. It was an invasion force. Kalen stood beside her, a statue carved from ice and iron. His twilight eyes tracked the formations, calculating. "They mean to siege the mountain," he said, his voice devoid of fear, only cold analysis. "They know they cannot take me head-on in my territory, so they will try to starve us out or force a mistake." Grandmother Yara joined them, her wrinkled face grim. "Valerius is no fool. She brings seers. They will try to corrupt the mountain's spirit, to turn the land itself against you, Kalen, and they will have brought knoll stones, like the one that wounded you." Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs. This was her fault. Her very existence had drawn this storm to his doorstep. "I should go down," she heard herself say, the words tasting like ash. "I should turn myself over. It would stop this." The reaction was instantaneous. Kalen's head snapped towards her, and for the first time she saw raw, blistering anger in his eyes. "Never." The word was a whip crack in the thin air. "You are not a bargaining chip. You are under my protection. That is not a temporary shelter, Lyra. It is a permanent claim. Do you understand? To get to you, they go through me, and through this." He gestured to the mountain, the trees, the very sky. "This land is now yours as much as it is mine. You do not surrender your home." The conviction in his voice was a physical force. It didn't just dismiss her offer, it incinerated it. She was not a burden to be disposed of. She was a ward, a responsibility, something valuable he would defend to his last breath. The concept was so foreign, it left her dizzy. "But what can we do?" she asked, desperation seeping in. "There are 2 of you and 1 of me against an army." A slow, dangerous smile touched Kaylin's lips. It was not a pleasant sight. "We do not fight an army. We dismantle it. An army needs water. It needs paths. It needs morale." He turned to Yera, "The hidden springs that feed the lower valley." The old woman's eyes gleamed with sudden understanding. The stone tongue's veins. Only a whisperer could find them, let alone influence them. Kaylin looked at Lyra. "Your first lesson in applied power. You will not raise a mountain. You will redirect a stream." The plan was audacious, terrifying. Lyra spent the next hour seated on the cold earth at the edge of the cliff, her eyes closed, her hands pressed flat against the rock. Kaylin knelt behind her, his presence a steady anchor. "Forget the army," he murmured, his voice a low vibration near her ear. "Listen for the water, the deep, steady, kingly note that spoke of mountains that could not be moved, of winters that were survived, of a presence that was here and now." She pushed aside the panic, the image of the gleaming army below. She sank into the vibration of the earth, deeper than before, past the heartbeat of the mountain, past the slow grind of tectonic plates. She sought a sound like a distant chime, a liquid whisper. There, a faint crystalline sensation, not a sound but a feeling of coolness and motion, far, far below. A network of them, like silver threads in the dark. "I feel it," she breathed. "Good. Now do not pull it, do not command it. That is conclave thinking, force and domination." His hand came to rest lightly between her shoulder blades, a point of contact that grounded her. "You are of the earth. You are kin. Sing to it of a different path. Show it a memory of another channel, one that lies dormant." How did one show a stream a memory? She focused on the feeling of the water. Its purpose was to flow, to seek the easiest path. She formed a thought, not of words, but of sensation, the satisfying rush of a new, clean, steep bed of stone, a shortcut to the open air far to the north, away from the conclave camp. She hummed, matching the resonant frequency of the deep rock, suggesting, inviting. For a long moment, nothing. Then a subtle shift, a tremor so deep it was more a sigh than a quake. The silver thread of sensation in her mind's eye twitched. It changed course by a fraction of a degree. Kaylin felt it too. "It listens," he said, awe cutting through his usual reserve. Lyra poured her focus into the song, the suggestion. She showed the water the joy of a faster run, the taste of open air. She felt a strange, ethereal exhaustion, not of her body, but of her spirit, as if she were persuading a shy, powerful creature. A deep, subterranean groan echoed through the mountain. Below, at the edge of the conclave camp, a section of ground near the main gathering point for water carriers suddenly sank, collapsing into a muddy sinkhole. The clear stream that had been trickling from a hillside spring gurgled, slowed to a drip, and then stopped. A cheer from the camp turned into shouts of confusion. Lyra opened her eyes, panting slightly. The view swum before her. She had done it. She hadn't moved a stone with her hands. She had whispered to the earth, and it had obeyed. "One stream," Kaylin said, helping her to her feet. His grip was firm. "They have others, but they will be nervous now. The land itself seems to reject them. That is a powerful weapon." Over the next 2 days, it became a silent, invisible war. While Kaylin and the few mountain wolves loyal to him set traps and used guerrilla tactics to pick off scouts, Lyra worked with the mountain. With Yera's guidance, she learned to listen for the tension in rock faces above conclave patrol routes. She didn't cause avalanches. She simply suggested to the precariously balanced stones that now was a good time to rest at the bottom of the slope. A low, resonant hum from her, and minutes later, a rock slide would block a key path, isolating a unit. She learned to soothe the roots of ancient trees, asking them to gently twist and rise during the night, turning firm ground into a treacherous, root-tangled maze that broke wagon axles and turned ankles. The Conclave army was not being attacked by an enemy they could see or fight. They were being thwarted by the territory itself. Morale, as Kaelin predicted, began to fray. Whispers of the Stone Witch and the Mountain's vengeance spread through the ranks. On the third night, a different kind of assault came, not physical, but spiritual. Lyra was resting in the keep when a wave of nausea hit her. The air grew thick and sour, tasting of rotten herbs and despair. From below, a chorus of discordant chanting rose, the seers working in unison. The mountain spirit, which had become a comforting presence in her mind, recoiled in pain. The stones of the keep walls wept a thin black sludge. The fire in the hearth guttered, emitting a foul smoke.
"They're poisoning the land's essence," Yera croaked, clutching her chest. "A blight song. If it takes root, the mountain will sicken. Kaelin's strength will wane." Lyra stumbled outside. Kaelin was already there, his face pale, veins standing out on his temples as he fought the invasive magic. His connection to his land was his strength, but now it was becoming a conduit for attack. "I can feel it, chewing at the edges," he gritted out, "like frostbite on the soul of this place." The wrongness of the blight song scraped against Lyra's senses. It was the opposite of everything she was learning. Where she sought harmony, this sought corruption. Where she asked, this commanded with malice. Without thinking, she ran to the highest point of the keep's roof. The wind whipped her hair. Below, she could see the circle of red-robed seers, their hands linked, their foul magic of visible greenish-black mist crawling up the mountainside towards them. She couldn't fight poison with force. She had to counter it with purity, with truth. She closed her eyes and stopped fighting the connection to the mountain. Instead, she opened herself completely to it, to the pain of the blight, the fear of the trees, the anger of the stones. She let it all in. And then, she did not sing a lullaby. She sang the mountain's own song back to it. It was a song of deep time, of glaciers carving valleys, of seeds persevering in cracks, of unyielding granite and patient growing roots. It was a song of endurance. She poured every ounce of her newfound connection, every shred of her first blood heritage, into that one clear, resonant note. It was not loud, but it was profound. It vibrated through the stone, through the roots, through the very air. The creeping blight mist hesitated. Where Lyra's song touched it, the greenish-black corruption flickered and dissolved, like darkness before a lit candle. The mountain, hearing its own heart song amplified and purified, rallied. The weeping sludge on the walls dried up and cracked, falling away as clean dust. The fire in the hearth below roared back to life, golden and clean. Down in the circle, the seers staggered. Their discordant chant broke as one of them cried out, clutching her head. The blight song shattered. Lyra's knees buckled. The effort had emptied her. She would have fallen, but Kaelin was there, catching her before she hit the stone. He held her close, his own breathing ragged, but his eyes blazing with a fierce, proud light. "You didn't just defend it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You healed it. You reminded this mountain what it is." He carried her back inside, her head resting against his shoulder. The resonance between them was no longer just a hum. It was a symphony, thrumming with shared triumph and exhaustion. The next morning, a single arrow arced up from the conclave camp and landed in the soft earth before the keep's gate. Tied to it was not a declaration of war, but a request, a single word embossed on fine parchment: parley. Kaelin read it, his expression unreadable. He looked at Lyra, who was sipping broth, her strength slowly returning. "Valerius is clever. The direct assault is failing.
Now she tries diplomacy. She will try to manipulate, to divide us. What do we do? Lyra asked. We listen, but we do not go to them. They come to us, on our terms, in our place. He looked at Yera. The meadow of the standing stones. It is a neutral ground, but the stones there, they remember the old songs, do they not? Yera nodded slowly, a sly smile on her lips. They do indeed. They remember the first bloods very well. Kalen turned his gaze back to the camp. Then we will parley. And Lyra, he said, his tone turning grave, you must be ready. She will look at you and see a weapon to be reclaimed or a threat to be destroyed. She will not see you a queen. You must show her, not with power, but with certainty. Can you do that? Lyra thought of the corrupted stream, the singing stones, the blight she had cleansed. She thought of the anchor standing beside her. She set down her bowl, her silver eyes meeting his with a steadiness that had been born in fire and tempered in stone. Yes, she said, I can. The first battle was over. The mountain stood. Now the war of words and wills was about to begin, and Lyra would be at the heart of it, no longer a hidden secret, but a force to be reckoned with. The meadow of the standing stones was a place of profound silence. The ancient monoliths, taller than 3 men, formed a rough circle on a high plateau between the mountain and the shadow wood. They were scarred with runes so old, even Grandmother Yera could not name their meaning, and they hummed with a low, patient energy. The air itself tasted of ozone and memory. Kalen and Lyra arrived first. He stood like one of the stones himself, clad in simple dark leathers, his crown absent, but his authority radiating from him in waves. Lyra stood beside him, not behind. She wore a tunic and trousers of soft gray, practical yet elegant, her silver hair braided back. Her hands were clasped calmly before her, but her heart was a frantic bird in her chest. She focused on the hum of the stones, letting their ancient stability steady her. Grandmother Yera positioned herself slightly apart, her staff planted firmly, a living witness to history. From the tree line, the conclave delegation emerged. High Seer Valerius was carried in her palanquin, which was set down at the edge of the stone circle. She descended, a figure of chilling elegance in her blood-red robes and golden raven mask. 4 elite guards flanked her, along with a severe-looking man Lyra recognized, Elder Corvin, the conclave's chief strategist. His eyes, the color of flint, swept over them, lingering with Lyra a mix of disdain and sharp calculation. No one else crossed the stone circle, as if an invisible boundary had been drawn. Valerius's masked face turned first to Kalen. Alpha King, your hospitality has been most instructive. Her voice was melodious, yet every word felt dipped in frost. We came for a corrupted vessel. We find a mountain defending a phantom. The only corruption here is the one you brought to my borders. The girl is under my protection. Your business with her is concluded. Concluded? Valerius gave a soft, mocking laugh. A conclave judgment is eternal, King Frostfang. It does not expire because a relic with a savior complex decides to play house with a dangerous artifact. The mask tilted towards Lyra. Do you even understand what you are, child, or has he filled your head with pretty tales of queenship? Lyra met the empty eye sockets of the mask. She remembered Kalen's words. Show her certainty. I understand that you and your ancestors murdered my family. I understand that you carved lies into my skin to keep me from my birthright. I am no artifact. I am Lyra of the first blood, and I am no one's child anymore. A slight stiffening of Valerius's shoulders was the only sign the words had struck home. First blood, she repeated, the term of venomous sigh. A poetic name for a genetic curse. Your ancestors' power drove them mad. They believed themselves gods. They burned forests, diverted rivers on whims, and sparked wars that nearly erased our kind.
The purge was not murder, it was a surgery, a necessary painful amputation to save the body of wolfkind. The story was delivered with such practiced, sorrowful conviction that for a heartbeat, doubt clawed at Lyra. What if it was true? What if this power inside me was a sickness? A convenient history, Grandmother Yera spoke, her scratchy voice breaking the spell. Written by the victors. I remember the songs before the purge. They spoke of harmony, not tyranny. Ulrich Stonesinger did not divert rivers on a whim. He guided them to nourish parched valleys after the conclave's own greed had damned them. The wars you speak of were his people defending themselves from your first secret raids. Elder Corvin stepped forward, his voice a dry rasp. Ancient history, old woman, speculative songs. We deal in the present danger. The power she carries is volatile, unstable. You have seen the signs, King. The earth trembles at her distress. The forest bends to her untrained will. What happens when she has a nightmare, when she feels anger or grief? Will she bring down a mountain on a village, dry up a river that feeds 1,000 souls? She is a walking catastrophe, and you have brought her into your home. He was clever. He wasn't attacking Kalen's strength or his right. He was attacking his responsibility as a ruler, painting him as reckless. Lyra saw the tactic and felt a cold anger rise, clean and sharp. They wanted to separate her from her only ally by preying on his duty. Kalen's expression did not change, but his eyes hardened. Your concern is noted and dismissed. Her training has already begun. Control is being learned. Can it be, asked Valerius, tilting her head, or is it merely being suppressed by...
The finality in his tone was absolute. A cold wind swept through the meadow. Valerius's masked face was unreadable, but the energy around her shifted, growing sharper, colder. Then you choose sentiment over security. You risk your people, your land, for a feeling? She turned her head slightly towards Lyra. And you, girl, will you let his pride be the doom of his kingdom? Will you cling to this protector, knowing every moment you stay, you paint a target on his back? Is that your gratitude? The poison dripped directly into Lyra's deepest fear. She had thought it herself just days ago. The weight of it pressed down on her. She saw not the army below, but a single arrow finding Kalen in battle because he was distracted protecting her. She saw his mountain home in ruins because of her. Her certainty wavered. The silver light beneath her skin flickered, dimmed by a wave of guilt. Kalen sensed it. He didn't touch her, but his voice, when he spoke, was for her alone, though it carried to all. My pride has nothing to do with this. My choice is based on truth. A tree does not grow strong in a vault. A wolf does not learn to run in a cage. You offer safety that is stagnation. I offer risk that is growth. And I have faith that the strength I see in her will protect this kingdom far better than your fear ever could. His faith. He said it plainly. He believed in her, not just her power, but her. Lyra felt the doubt shatter like ice. The guilt evaporated, burned away by a new, fierce resolve. She would become the protector. She would master this, not for herself, but to prove his faith right. She stepped forward, one deliberate step that brought her level with Kalen's shoulder. She looked directly at Valerius. I have heard your offer. It is refused. My place is here. My teacher is here. My future is here. You are not welcome in this territory. Take your army and go. For a long, tense moment, silence held the meadow. The standing stones seemed to lean in, listening. Then Valerius laughed, a soft, chilling sound. So be it. The stubborn pup chooses the wolf who found her. A touching fable. She turned back to her palanquin. But remember, King Frostfang, storms do not ask permission. They simply arrive. And this one, she glanced back at Lyra, this one will be of your own making. The conclave delegation retreated into the trees, a splash of red and black swallowed by the green. The moment they were gone, Lyra's knees trembled. The confrontation had trained her more than moving stones. Kaylin's hand came to her elbow, steadying her. "You did well," he said quietly. "She tried to turn me against you," Lyra whispered, the aftershock of the psychological battle hitting her. "I know, and she failed." He looked down at her, his twilight gaze intense. "Because you and I, Lyra, we are not built on sand. We are built on stone, on truth. Their words are wind. They can howl, but they cannot move us." Grandmother Yara hobbled over. "Do not be fooled by their retreat. Valerius's pride is wounded. She will not simply leave. A frontal assault failed. Diplomacy failed. Now she will resort to what the conclave does best." "What's that?" Lyra asked. Yara's old eyes were dark. "Subterfuge. Poison. They will try to turn your people against you, Kaylin. They will spread whispers that you are bewitched, that you endanger them for a monster. They will look for cracks in your alliance." She looked between them. "And they will try to separate you. That is their true goal. Divide and conquer. As long as you stand together, you are a fortress. Apart, you are vulnerable." As they walked back to the keep, the weight of the warning settled over them. The open war of blades and magic might be paused, but a quieter, dirtier war was beginning. A war of whispers in the dark, of doubted loyalties, of fear carefully planted. Lyra looked at Kaylin's profile etched against the mountain sky. They had won the parley, but the most dangerous part, she sensed, was just beginning. The conclave had shown its teeth in the meadow. Now it would show its claws in the shadows, and she would have to be ready, not just to sing to stones, but to guard the hearts of those who were starting to feel like her people. The conclave did not leave. Their army simply receded like a dark tide, pulling back a few miles into the Shadow Woods fringes, a brooding, silent threat just beyond the border. The quiet they left behind was worse than the war horns. It was a waiting silence, pregnant with malice. As Grandmother Yara predicted, the whispers began. Kaylin had a small but loyal population in the North Reach, hardy wolf families who mined the deep crystals, tended mountain goats on perilous slopes, and guarded the high passes. They were a stoic people, fiercely independent, who respected Kaylin for his strength and his fairness, but also for the century of peace his neutrality had bought them. Now, that peace was shattered, and a strange, silver-eyed girl was at the center of the storm. Lyra first felt the shift at the weekly gathering at the main village below the keep, where disputes were settled and supplies traded. She went with Kaylin, wanting to see the people he ruled, to connect with the land beyond the mountain spirit. The atmosphere was tense. Respectful bows were given to Kaylin, but I slid away from Lyra or stared a moment too long, filled with unease. I heard fragments of conversation, hastily silenced as she cast. "Earthquake last night, did you feel it? Never felt one like that before she came. My cousin says the Shadowwood is weeping black sap where the conclave camps. The Alpha King has always been wise, but a man alone so long, can he see clearly?" The words were like little knives. They didn't accuse, they insinuated. They painted her as a calamity and Kaylin as a fool led by infatuation. The conclave's poison was subtle and effective. Worse was the visit from Torvin, the village elder, a grizzled wolf with a missing ear from a long-ago border skirmish. He came to the keep that evening, his hat in his hands. "Alpha," he began, his voice gravelly with respect. "The people, they are afraid. The conclave has never breached our borders before. Now they sit there, a dagger at our throat. And the young miss," he nodded awkwardly at Lyra, "there are tales of the land acting strange. Some say it's a blessing. Others, they remember old stories of the First Blood Wars, of lands that turned on their people." Kalen listened, his face impassive. The land is strong, Torvin. It responds to a new presence, one that honors it, not exploits it. The tremors are the mountain adjusting, not angry. My king, I believe you. But belief is thin soup when children are hungry. The South trade caravans have stopped. They fear crossing near the conclave. Our winter stores will be low. The conclave says they will let trade resume if... He trailed off, unable to say it. If I hand her over, Traylon finished, his voice dangerously soft. Torvin looked at the floor. They say it's not a surrender, just a temporary relocation for study, for everyone's safety. He was parroting Valerius's words exactly. The poison had reached the village's heart. Lyra's heart clenched. This was the true attack, not on their bodies, but on their unity, on Kalen's legitimacy as a ruler who put his people first. Kalen stood, his height and presence filling the stone room. Tell the people this, Torvin. The conclave does not negotiate. It consumes. If I give them what they want today, they will want more tomorrow. First, my ward, then my compliance, then your sons for their armies, your daughters for their rituals. The safety they offer is the safety of the leash. We have lived free under the open sky. I will not trade that freedom for a full belly bought with cowardice. The winter will be hard, but we will face it together, as free wolves, not conclave pets. His words were a declaration, ringing with the king's truth. Torvin's shoulders straightened slightly. The doubt in his eyes was still there, but it was now mixed with a spark of shame and rekindled pride. He bowed deeply. I will tell them, Alpha. After Torvin left, the silence in the keep was heavy. Lyra finally spoke, her voice small. He's not right. They are suffering because of me. They are suffering because of the conclave's ambition, Kalen corrected, turning to her. His gaze was earnest. You are the excuse, not the cause. If not you, they would find another reason to try and break my territory. A disputed mine, a wandering pack member. You must understand this, Lyra. This is not about you. It is about power. The logic was sound, but it didn't ease the ache in her chest. She had spent a lifetime being a burden. The idea that she was now a burden to an entire kingdom was unbearable. I need to do more than just sing to streams. I need to help them, to show them I'm not just a curse.
The trade routes are blocked, but the land provides. If I can listen to it, truly listen, maybe I can find what it hides. The deep root tubers Grandmother Yara speaks of, the crystal veins that run warm and can heat homes, the sheltered valleys where late-season berries might still grow. It was a practical application of her power, not for war, but for life. A way to heal instead of hinder. Kyle saw the wisdom in it, and a flicker of pride warmed his austere features. Then we listen. The next day, they ventured to a struggling Highfield farm owned by a widower named Bren and his 2 young sons. Their barley crop was stunted, the soil thin and rocky. Despair hung over the small stone house. Lyra didn't promise miracles. She asked Bren if she could walk his land. Suspicious but polite, he agreed. She walked the boundaries, her boots on the cold earth, her hands brushing the sickly barley heads. She closed her eyes and sank into the song of this specific patch of earth. It was a song of exhaustion, of nutrients leached away by generations of farming, of deep bedrock too close to the surface. But as she listened deeper, past the fatigue, she heard another thread, a faint, watery melody, an underground seep, not enough for a well, but enough to nourish if it could be reached. She opened her eyes and pointed to a seemingly barren, rocky patch near the field's edge. There is water here. Not much, but it is sweet. If you dig here 3 feet down, you will find a seep. Channel it through clay pipes along the field's edge. It will give your barley a drink when the rain fails. Bren looked skeptical, But one of his sons, eager for hope, grabbed a shovel. They dug. At 3 feet, the dry soil gave way to damp, dark earth. A few inches more, and a trickle of clear water began to fill the hole. The boy whooped. Bran's eyes went wide, then filled with tears. It wasn't a river, but it was life. It was hope. Word began to spread. Lyra went with Kael to a crystal mine where a collapse had trapped a vein and demoralized the miners. She placed her hands on the mountain wall, listening to the song of the mountain's bones. She felt the stress fracture, the precarious balance. With a hum that vibrated through the rock, she didn't command it to move. She asked the surrounding stone to gently, slowly brace the fracture, to shift the pressure by a hair's breadth. Over the next hour, with the miners watching in awe, the rubble at the tunnel face shifted and settled, revealing the glittering crystal vein behind it, now accessible and safe. She was not performing grand magic. She was acting as a translator, a mediator between the people and the land they lived on but had forgotten how to hear. With each small act, the suspicious looks in the village began to soften. The whispers didn't stop entirely. The conclave's agents were still at work, but they were now countered by new stories. Stories of the stone speaker, the root whisperer, who could find water in drought and stability in collapse. One evening, as Lyra and Kael returned from helping reinforce a shaky bridge, they found a small basket left at the keep's gate. It contained a loaf of dark bread, a wedge of hard cheese, and a few precious winter apples. No note. It was a simple, wordless gift, an offering of thanks. Lyra picked up an apple, its skin cool and smooth. Her eyes stung. It was the first unconditional gift she had ever received that wasn't tainted by pity or fear. "You see," Kael said quietly, standing beside her, "you are not taking from them, Lyra. You are giving back. You are becoming part of this place, and it is becoming part of you." The resonance between them hummed, strong and steady. They were winning the war of whispers, not with louder shouts, but with quiet, undeniable acts of belonging. But the conclave was not finished. A few nights later, the attack came from within, not from a doubting villager, but from a shadow that had slipped past even Kael's vigilance. Lyra was awoken by a feeling of intense wrongness, a scent of cloying perfume and rusted metal. She sat up in the dark to see a figure standing at the foot of her bed, a figure with golden braids and eyes full of a tortured resolve. It was Alara. In her hand, she held a dagger made of pure null stone, and her gaze was fixed on the fading rune on Lyra's collarbone. "I'm so sorry, Lyra," she whispered, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. "But he's made you a target, and this power in you, it's a sickness. I have to cut it out. For you, for everyone, before it's too late." The null stone dagger gleamed in the thin moonlight filtering through the high window, not with light, but with an absence of it. It seemed to suck the very warmth from the air. Alara's hand trembled, but her grip was firm, her eyes a maelstrom of grief, guilt, and a terrifying, zealous conviction. Lyra froze, her heart a trapped bird beating against her ribs. This was not a conclave hunter in the dark. This was the girl who had shared her secrets, her dreams, her childhood. The face of her deepest betrayal now held a weapon meant to erase her completely. "Alara," Lyra breathed, the name a plea and a curse wrapped into one. "Don't do this." "You don't understand," Alara whispered, her voice cracking. "I saw the reports. After they took you, the seers showed me the historical records of the First Bloods, the madness, the destruction. They weren't saints, Lyra. They were tyrants who thought the world was their toy. The purge, it was horrible, but it was necessary. The power in you, it's a parasite, and it's changing you." A sob hitched in her throat. "The Lyra I knew would never have stood with the Alpha King who let the northern clans starve during the Great Freeze.
She would have turned herself in to save a village from a siege. The lies were so intricately woven with half-truths and twisted history. Lyra felt a cold fury rise, sharper and cleaner than fear. The Lyra you knew was kept in the dark and fed lies, and the Alpha King didn't let anyone starve. The Conclave blocked the supply routes, just like they're doing now. You're repeating their poison, Alara. Can't you see that? They've shown me proof, Alara said, taking a step forward, the dagger held low and steady. Letters, decrees, they showed me what you did to the mountain, making it tremble, redirecting streams. You're playing with forces you can't control. What happens when you have a bad dream, when you get angry at him? She jerked her head towards the door behind which Kael slept. Will he bring his keep down on his head? I'm saving you from becoming a monster. I'm saving him from you. The manipulation was exquisite. It painted her assassination attempt as an act of mercy, of sisterly love. Lyra understood now the true depth of the Conclave's strategy. They hadn't just sent a trained killer, they had weaponized her past, her love, and turned it against her. They've broken your mind, Alara, Lyra said slowly, pushing back the furs, keeping her movements non-threatening. The Conclave doesn't have proof. They have forgeries and fear. I have lived this power. I have felt its song. It's not madness, it's harmony. And Kael, he's not my jailer or my victim. He's my teacher, my protector. You're brainwashed, Alara hissed, the dagger lifting an inch. He's using you, a first blood weapon to reclaim his lost glory. Can't you see it? You're just a tool to him. The door to the chamber burst open. Kael stood there, not in a rage, but in a deadly, focused calm. He was fully dressed, his twilight eyes taking in the scene in an instant. He didn't rush. He simply stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him, cutting off any escape. Alara, Kael said, his voice a low vibration that seemed to still the very air. Drop the blade. Alara flinched but held her ground, turning the dagger towards him. Stay back. This is between sisters. There is no sisterhood in betrayal, Kael stated, taking a single, measured step forward. There is only the predator and the prey, and you have made yourself the former in my home. His gaze flicked to the nullstone dagger. A clever choice. It would sever her connection to her power, perhaps permanently. It might even kill her. Is that your mercy? It would save her soul, Alara cried, tears now flowing freely. It would save everyone. You are not here to save anyone, Kael's voice turned to ice. You are here because Valerius knew a frontal assault would fail. She knew my guards would stop an outsider, so she sent the one person who could get close. She sent the ghost of Lyra's heart to murder it. You are not an agent of salvation, girl. You are a weapon, a particularly cruel one. His words were a hammer, shattering Alara's fragile narrative. She blinked, confusion warring against her programmed purpose. No, she said it was the only way to fix what was broken. What is broken, Lyra said, her voice gaining strength as she rose to her feet, is the Conclave's hold on you. Look at me, Alara. Really look. Do I look like a raving tyrant? Do I look like I'm about to bring down the mountain?
Alara pulled back, her face ravaged. They have my brother, Ronan. They took him after the Shadow Wood. They said if I failed, they would make him a blood slave in their minds. Fresh horror dawned in her eyes. I was so convinced I was right. Oh, moon and stars, Lyra, The Conclave's cruelty knew no bounds. They hadn't just manipulated Alara. They had held a loved one hostage to ensure her compliance. Lyra looked up at Kaelin, a new resolve crystallizing in her silver eyes. This was no longer just about her survival, or even defending a kingdom. It was about dismantling a machine of evil that broke families and twisted love into weapons. We have to get him back, Lyra said, her voice firm. Kaelin studied her, then gave a single, slow nod.
We will, but not by charging into their camp. We have a new advantage. He looked at Alara. You know their patrol patterns. You know the layout of the camp. You know where they would keep a prisoner. Alara wiped her face, a spark of desperate purpose cutting through her shame. I do. I can tell you everything. The guard changes, the seer's tents, the pit where they keep the corrupted for study. She spat the last word. The rest of the night was spent in grim planning. Alara, fueled by a burning need for atonement, drew maps in the ashes of the hearth, detailing every inch of the conclave encampment she could remember. She described the arrogance of the guards, the predictable routines of the seers, the hidden path through a fissure in the rock behind the camp that was used for waste disposal and was lightly guarded. A plan formed, not of brute force, but of stealth and precision, a rescue mission. As the first gray light of dawn touched the sky, Alara was exhausted but clear-eyed. She looked at Lyra. I don't expect you to ever trust me again, but let me do this. Let me help get him back. Lyra met her gaze. The bond of sisterhood was shattered, but a new, fragile alliance was forming, one forged in the aftermath of betrayal and a shared enemy. We will get him back, Lyra said, together. Kaelin observed the exchange. The emotional battlefield was as complex as the physical one. He saw Lyra's strength, not just in her power, but in her capacity for a mercy he himself might not have been able to muster. It was a queen's strength. Rest, Ilara. You will have a part to play, but you need strength. He assigned a taciturn but trustworthy guard to watch over her, not as a prisoner, but as a protected asset. Once they were alone in the main hall, Kaelin turned to Lyra. This changes the game. A rescue mission is a risk. It could be a trap within a trap. I know, but we can't leave Ronan to them. And Alara, she's a crack in their armor, a source of true intelligence. We have to use this. He nodded. We will, but we move with the mountain's patience, not a wolf's impulse. We prepare, we watch, we strike when the time is exact. He paused, his gaze intense. And you, Lyra, this will be different from singing to stones. This will be close, quiet, and dangerous. Your power may not be your primary weapon. Your silence will be. Lyra understood. This was the next step in her training. Not just communion, but application. Not just power, but cunning. She looked out the window, towards the brooding shadowwood, where her past and her future were both imprisoned. Then teach me to be silent, she said, turning her silver eyes to him. Teach me to be the shadow that walks through their walls. Kaelin Frostfang, the king who had lived in winter for a century, felt a strange warmth kindle in his chest. She was no longer just a ward to protect. She was a partner in strategy, a fellow ruler in the making. The enemy had tried to break them with a ghost from the past. Instead, they had handed them a key. The game was indeed changing, and for the first time, Kaelin allowed himself to believe they might just win it. For 3 days, they planned and prepared. The atmosphere in the keep shifted from defensive dread to focused, quiet energy. Ilara, under the watchful eye of Grandmother Yara, recovered her strength and poured every detail she could remember onto parchment. The Amcamp layout became a familiar map in their minds. The fissure waste, a narrow, foul-smelling crack in a cliff face behind the latrine trenches, was their point of entry. It was the Conclave's arrogance that made it viable. They never imagined an attack from the direction of their own filth. Kaelin's strategy was one of misdirection. On the night of the rescue, he would lead a small, visible contingent of his best warriors to the southern main pass, making a show of strengthening the barricades and challenging the Conclave sentries. It would be a noisy, obvious distraction, drawing the bulk of the guards' attention. Meanwhile, the true mission would move in absolute silence. The team was minimal. Lyra, guided by her growing ability to feel the earth's whispers, Eric, Kaelin's most stealthy scout, a wolf who could blend into a shadow, and Alara, whose knowledge was their compass and whose desperate need to atone was her fuel. Kaelin would join them after creating the initial diversion, moving through paths only he knew. Lyra's training in those 3 days was intense and entirely new. Kaelin taught her not to project her power, but to contain it, to wrap it so tightly around her core that she became virtually invisible to the magical senses of the seers. He taught her to walk without sound, to breathe in time with the wind, to feel the vibrations of a guard's footstep through the soles of her boots before she could hear it. "Your power is not a torch to be swung," he murmured to her in the training yard as dusk fell on the 3rd day. "Tonight it must be a shard of obsidian, sharp, focused, and black. You will not speak to the stones unless you must, and if you must, it will be the softest whisper, a sigh lost in the mountain's own breath." Lyra understood. This was the next step in her training, not just communion, but application, not just power, but cunning. She looked in dark, soft leathers, her hair braided tightly back. She felt a strange calm settle over her, the nervous energy funneled into a single point of purpose. This was for Ronan. This was to sever one more chain the conclave held. As full darkness embraced the mountain, Kaelin gave her one last long look. The usual resonance between them was muted, purposefully dampened, but the connection was a taut wire. "Trust the stone, trust your senses. I will find you in the dark." Then he was gone, melting into the twilight to lead his decoy force. The real journey began. Led by Eric, they moved like ghosts down a treacherous goat path away from the keep's lights. Alara followed, her face set in a grim determination. Lyra brought up the rear, her senses stretched thin, listening to the mountain's slumbering song, using it to mask their passage. The descent was long and tense. The smell of the conclave camp reached them first. Wood smoke, cooked meat, and the underlying stench of too many bodies and poor sanitation. Then came the sounds, the murmur of voices, the clank of armor, a distant, chilling laugh. Eric held up a fist. They had reached the upper rim of the fissure. Below, the camp sprawled like an infected wound, torches casting pools of jaundiced light. The fissure was a black seam in the rock before them, exhaling a putrid, warm breath. Eric went first, vanishing into the darkness without a sound. A moment later, a soft, owl-like hoot signaled all clear. Alara went next, her movements sure. Lyra took a final breath of clean air and followed. The fissure was tight, damp, and vile. Sharp rocks scraped at their clothes. The stench was overwhelming, a physical presence. Lyra focused on the feel of the rock against her palms, its solid, ancient reality beneath the temporary filth. She hummed the barest thread of a note, not to change the stone, but to ask it for stability, to feel for weak points. The stone answered with a sense of grudging solidity. This too shall pass, it seemed to sigh. After an eternity of crawling, a dim light appeared ahead. The fissure opened into a shallow trench behind the latrines. They emerged one by one into the reeking darkness, crouching behind a pile of discarded crates. The sounds of the camp were immediate and close. Alara pointed, her hand barely visible. 2 guards leaned against a supply wagon 30 paces away, sharing a flask, their attention on the commotion at the southern pass, where Kaelin's diversion was in no doubt full swing. Raised voices and the clash of steel echoed from that direction. Perfect. "The pit is on the far eastern edge, near the seer's circle," Alara breathed directly into Lyra's ear. "They keep it warded with silence runes. No one hears what happens there." They moved, Eric a fleeting shadow, Alara a silent memory of the camp's rhythms, and Lyra a patch of concentrated nothingness. They slipped between tents, ducked under ropes, froze as patrols passed mere feet away. Lyra's heart hammered, but
From their hiding spot behind a water barrel, they saw him. Ronan. He was in a cage not 20 feet from the pit's edge, slumped against the bars. He was thinner, his face bruised, but his eyes were open, staring blankly at the ground. The proud, distant mate from the clearing was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shell. Alara made a small, choked sound. Lyra squeezed her arm. Eric scanned the area. One guard at the cage post, dozing. 2 seers by the pit, chanting. They're preparing something. Lyra followed his gaze. 2 red-robed figures stood at the rim of the pit, their hands moving in complex patterns over a small brazier. A foul, greenish smoke coiled upward. A sacrifice? A ritual to break Ronan's will completely? They had to move now. The plan was simple. Eric would take out the dozing guard. Alara would get the keys and open the cage. Lyra's role was to deal with the seers, not with force, but with disruption. As Eric slithered away into the deeper shadows, Lyra closed her eyes. She couldn't attack the seer's magic directly without a potentially catastrophic release of energy, but she could attack their platform. She tuned her senses to the stone rim of the pit itself. It was ancient limestone, porous, brittle, and it was tired of holding this foulness. She didn't push. She didn't command. She simply found a tiny fault line, a hair's breadth crack, and she sang to it. A single, pure, high note of tension, the sound a crystal glass makes before it shatters. She poured into it all her revulsion for the corruption, her sympathy for the stone's burden. But 2 seers paused in their chanting. One looked down at his feet, puzzled. Then, with a sound like a giant sigh, a section of the pit's rim directly under the brazier and between the 2 seers crumbled inward. Not a violent collapse, but a sudden, quiet subsidence. The brazier tipped, scattering embers and foul smoke. The seers yelped, stumbling back from the unstable edge, their ritual broken, their concentration shattered in a cloud of dust and confusion. At that exact moment, Eric's shadow detached itself from the darkness behind the guard post. There was a soft thud, and the guards slid silently to the ground. Alara was already moving, a gray wraith darting to the post, snatching the keyring. Her hands trembled so badly she fumbled the lock. Ronan looked up, his eyes widening in disbelief. Alara? No, it's a trick. It's real, brother, she whispered, her voice thick. The lock clicked. She pulled the cage door open. Ronan stumbled out, weak and disoriented. Eric was there, pulling Ronan's arm over his shoulder. Time to go, now. But the commotion at the pit had drawn attention. A shout went up from a nearby tent. Prisoner loose! They ran, back the way they came, with Eric half carrying Ronan, Alara guiding, and Lyra bringing the rear. Alarms began to sound, horns blaring, voices rising in anger. Torches flared to life, weaving through the tents as the camp awoke to the threat within. They reached the relative cover of the supply area, but a patrol was cutting off their route to the fissure. 4 guards, weapons drawn, formed a line. Go around, Eric hissed, shoving Ronan towards Alara and drawing his own short blades. But going around meant deeper into the camp. They were trapped. Lyra looked at the ground between them and the guards. It was a trodden path of hard-packed dirt and scattered stones. An idea, desperate and instinctive, flared. She dropped to one knee, pressing both palms to the earth. This was not a whisper. This was a request, urgent and clear. Sleep, she sang to the earth beneath the guard's feet. Sleep and dream of soft sand. The guards charged, and as their feet hit the patch of ground Lyra had touched, the hard-packed dirt dissolved into a pit of loose, sucking quicksand. It wasn't deep, only to their knees, but it was sudden and shocking. They stumbled, cried out, sinking and flailing, their advance halted completely. Move! Lyra gasped, surging to her feet. They sprinted the last distance to the foul fissure, diving into its welcoming blackness as the camp erupted into chaos behind them. They dragged Ronan up the narrow, stinking chimney, fear lending them strength. Shouts and the flicker of torchlight probed the fissure's mouth behind them, but no one followed. No one wanted to crawl into that stink on a hunch.
When they finally emerged, gasping into the clean, cold air of the mountainside, they collapsed for a moment, trembling with adrenaline and relief. Ronan looked between his sister and Lyra, his eyes clearing from shock to dazed gratitude. A shadow separated from a rock. Kaelin. He looked them over, his gaze lingering on Lyra, checking for injury. The diversion worked. They are chasing phantoms in the south. Can he walk? Ronan nodded, pushing himself up with Alara's help. I can run. Their return to the keep was a swift, silent retreat. The mission was a success. They had stolen a soul back from the abyss, struck a blow at the Conclave's heart, and gained a prisoner whose knowledge could be invaluable. But as Lyra walked beside Kaelin in the pre-dawn gloom, she felt a new tension thrumming in the air. They had poked the hornet's nest directly. The Conclave had been humiliated, a prisoner taken from under their noses, their rituals disrupted, their camp made a mockery. Valerius would not respond with another parley or a patient siege. As they slipped back into the silent keep, the first flakes of a bitter early snow began to fall. Lyra knew, with a cold certainty that settled in her bones, the waiting was over. The real storm was about to break, and it would be a blizzard of fury and blood. The snow fell for 2 days, a thick, silent blanket that smothered sound and painted the world in shades of white and gray. It should have brought a hushed peace. Instead, it felt like the world was holding its breath. The success of the rescue was a shadow victory, tasted briefly before the coming retribution soured the air. Ronan recovered in a secluded chamber, tended by Grandmother Yara's herbs and Alara's remorseful care. He was broken but not shattered. The Conclave's questioning had been brutal, but it had also stripped away his blind obedience. He confirmed everything Alara had said and more. The Conclave's plan was never to siege indefinitely. They were waiting for something, a weapon from the south. They called it Frostbane, something that could negate the mountain's advantage, something that could unmake a territory's spirit. Kaelin's face grew graver with each word. A weapon that could attack the land itself was a threat of a different magnitude. It wasn't just an army to fight, it was a poison for the very ground beneath their feet. The snow brought another, more immediate problem. The mountain passes, their lifelines for trade and communication, were now sealed. The village below the keep was truly cut off. The whispers that had begun to quiet with Lyra's helpful deeds now returned with a new pragmatic fear. It was one thing to stand defiant in autumn, it was another to face starvation in the deep freeze. Kaelin called a council in the great hall of the keep. Torvin the elder was there, along with Eric, Bren the farmer, and a few other stedholders. The mood was grim. The snows are early and heavy, Torvin stating the obvious they all felt. The high stores are less than half of what we need if this lasts. The game will flee or bury itself. We can last a month, maybe 2, then... He left the grim future unspoken. The Conclave sits fat and warm in the forest below. They have supply lines from the south. They can wait us out until we're gnawing on our own boot leather. Then we cannot let them wait. We must make their position untenable. We must force their hand before this frostbane arrives, or the winter truly bites. How, my king? We are fewer. The mountain is our shield, but it is also our cage now.
All eyes turned to Lyra. She had been listening quietly, feeling the weight of their fear like a physical pressure. They didn't see a queen or a savior. They saw a strange girl who could find water but couldn't melt snow or summon grain. She felt the inadequacy of her power acutely. But Kaelin's gaze held a different question. Not what can you do, but what do you see? Lyra closed her eyes, not to block them out, but to listen past their fear. She reached for the mountain's song, buried under the blanket of snow. It was a slower, deeper melody now, a song of hibernation and immense, patient cold. But within it, she felt other threads. The thermal veins of crystal Eric had mentioned, running warm deep below. The sheltered, south-facing alcoves where sun might still linger. The memory the stone held of ancient ice dams that had once held back glacial lakes. An idea, fragile and dangerous, began to form. She opened her eyes, her silver gaze meeting Kaelin's. We can't grow food, we can't stop the snow,
but we can change the game." She looked at Torvin. "You said the conclave supplies come from the south, through the Shadowwood passes." "Aye, along the Blackwater River Road. It's the only route wide enough for their wagons." Lyra turned to Kaelin. "The mountain remembers the old ice dams. The Blackwater is fed by melt from these peaks. If we could encourage a shift, not a flood, just enough of a diversion, a blockage further up its course, in the high narrows, it would make their road a marsh, then a frozen bog. Wheeled transport would be impossible. They'd have to carry supplies on foot through the snow. It would slow them to a crawl, strain their resources." The room was silent, absorbing the scale of what she was suggesting. It wasn't an attack on men, but on logistics, a subtle geological sabotage. "Can you do that?" Draven asked, doubt etched on his face. "That's not finding a seep, girl, that's moving a river." "I would not move it," Lyra said, her voice gaining confidence as the plan crystallized. "I would ask the mountain to remember an old ache. There's a weakness in the canyon wall above the narrows. The stone there is fractured, dreaming of falling. I felt it. A nudge, a suggestion at the right time. After a heavy snowmelt, it might answer." Kaelin studied her. The risk was enormous. If she misjudged, she could cause a catastrophic landslide that might dam the river completely and flood their own lower valleys, or fail entirely and expose her to the conclave. The timing would be everything, and you would have to be there, close. "I know," Lyra said, holding his gaze. The unspoken understanding passed between them. She would have to go beyond the safety of the keep, into the contested territory, under the noses of the conclave. "It's madness," Torvin muttered, but there was a spork in his old eyes, a desperate, daring hope. "It is the only move we have that is not slow surrender," Kaelin declared. "We will do it, but we do not rely on one stroke." He began to lay out a full plan. While Lyra worked on the river, Kaelin would lead raids on the conclave's forward supply caches, using the snow for cover. Eric and other scouts would harass their patrols, keeping them off balance. Bren and the other farmers, with Lyra's guidance, would attempt to tap the thermal veins to create warm, sheltered pits for growing hardy winter moss and lichen. A poor food, but better than nothing. It was a plan of many parts, a symphony of pressure, and Lyra's part was the crescendo. Preparation was swift. 2 nights later, under a moon obscured by thick cloud, Lyra found herself crawling through a different kind of fissure, a dry, ancient watercourse that wound down the mountain's eastern face, ending high above the Blackwater Narrows. With her were Kaelin and Eric. Ilara had begged to come, to guard Lyra's back, but she was assigned to watch Ronan and help Grandmother Yara coordinate the village efforts. Her atonement would be in trust, not in risk. The journey was a cold, silent nightmare of clinging to frozen rock and edging across wind-scoured ledges. Lyra's missed skills were tested to their limit, feeling for stable footing through the soles of her boots, sensing the groan of overhanging snow before it could avalanche. Kaelin was a shadow ahead, always there, a steadying point in the howling dark. They reached the vantage point as false dawn tinged the sky as sickly gray. Below, the Blackwater was a ribbon of snarling iron gray, cutting between sheer cliffs. The conclave road was a darker line along its bank. Further down, the lights of the main conclave camp glittered like malevolent eyes. Lyra found her place, a small, flat ledge overlooking the narrows. She could feel it now, the deep, singing tension in the cliff face opposite. A massive slab of rock, undercut by centuries of water, held in place by a precarious lattice of lesser stone and frozen earth. It was a geological sigh waiting to be exhaled. "This is it," Lyra whispered, her breath frosting. "The weakness is here, but the trigger, it needs the weight of the snowbelt. The sun must hit the upper slopes first." Kaelin nodded, his eyes scanning the terrain. "We have time. The sun will rise in an hour. We wait." He positioned himself between her and the possible approaches, a silent sentinel. Eric melted into the rocks above, a watchful ghost. The wait was an eternity. Lyra sat on the cold stone, her hands pressed against it, listening. She sank into the slow, grinding song of the mountain's bones. She felt the immense pressure of the snowpack above, the delicate balance of the fracture. She didn't force her will upon it. She became a part of the tension, understanding it, feeling its desire to rest at a new, lower angle. As the sun finally breached the distant peaks, its pale light touched the high snowfields. A slow melt began, water trickling into hidden cracks, seeping down into the fracture zone. Lyra felt the change, a minute increase in pressure, a softening in the icy mortar that held the fault. Now the mountain seemed to whisper, "The balance tips." Lyra opened her mouth. She did not sing a loud note. She released the hum that had been building in her chest, the exact resonant frequency of the fracturing stone. It was not a command to fall. It was a permission to rest, a lullaby for a tired giant. She poured into it her will for the river to be blocked, her hope for her people, her defiance of the conclave. The resonance with Kaelin, though muted, thrummed at the edge of her awareness, a steady bass note of support. For a moment, nothing. Then a deep, groaning shiver ran through the cliff face. Not a violent shudder, but a profound, settling sigh. A cloud of ice crystals and dust puffed out from 1,000 cracks. And then, with the sound of 1,000 trees sighing at once, the entire slab, the size of a keep tower, detached. It didn't tumble violently. It slid, in a single, graceful, devastating motion, down the cliff face and into the narrowest points of the Blackwater Gorge. The impact was a deep, booming crunch that echoed through the mountains. A spray of ice and rock dust plumed into the air. The river, constricted in an instant, roared in protest, its waters piling up behind the new gigantic dam. Within minutes, the road along the bank began to disappear under spreading icy water. It was done, not with fire and claw, but with a whisper and a sigh. Lyra sagged, drained to her core. Kaelin was at her side in an instant, his arm around her shoulders, holding her up. "It is done," he said, his voice full of a fierce pride. "You did it." In the distance from the conclave camp, alarms began to sound, but they were alarms of confusion, of a catastrophe with no obvious enemy. They would see a natural landslide, a cruel twist of fate. But as Kaelin helped Lyra begin the arduous climb back to the keep, a new sound reached them on the frigid wind. Not an alarm horn, a different, deeper, more ominous sound, the long, low blast of a great horn from the far south end of the valley. A sound that spoke of arrival, not alarm. Kaelin froze, his head tilting. His face, which had held a glimmer of triumph, went utterly still, then hardened into something colder than the surrounding stone. "What is it?" Lyra whispered, her exhaustion forgotten in the face of his reaction. His twilight eyes met hers, and in them she saw the reflection of the coming storm. "Frostbane," he said, the single word hanging in the frozen air like a death knell. The sound of the great horn faded, leaving a deeper silence in its wake. It was the silence of a predator's arrival, felt more than heard. The climb back to the keep was a blur of exhaustion and dread for Lyra, supported by Kaelin's grim strength. The success of the landslide felt hollow, a minor skirmish one just as the main enemy force revealed its true weapon. From the high walls of the keep at dawn, they saw it. Frostbane was not an army. It was a machine, or a creature, it was hard to tell. It rolled into the valley floor on great segmented wheels of black iron, pulled by a team of massive blindfolded oxen that seemed more like shambling constructs than living beasts. The machine itself was a fortress on wheels, forged from the same dark metal, adorned with jagged, frozen spikes, and etched with runes that hurt the eyes to look at. From its peak, a twisted, crystalline spire pulsed with a sickly blue light.
Around it marched a new contingent of conclave soldiers, clad in armor that seemed to drink the light, their faces hidden behind featureless helms. They moved with a chilling, synchronized precision. An earthbreaker. Grandmother Yara hissed from beside them, her knuckles white on her staff. A blasphemy from the Southern Smith cults. I thought they were legend.
It does not just negate a land spirit, it devours it, feeds on the vital energy of a place, and turns it to dead, frozen waste. As they watched, the machine ground to a halt at the very edge of the shadow wood, facing the mountain. The blue light in its spire intensified. A low, subsonic hum vibrated through the air, making Lyra's teeth ache. Then, a beam of concentrated, icy blue energy lanced out from the spire, not at the keep, but at the mountain's lower slopes. Where the beam touched, life didn't just die, it unmade. A stand of ancient pines didn't catch fire or freeze. They turned gray and brittle, then crumbled to ash in seconds, as if 1,000 years of decay happened in a heartbeat. The vibrant green moss and hardy mountain grass in the beam's path desiccated, the color leaching from the earth itself, leaving behind a patch of sterile, gray dirt that looked dead. Not frozen, dead. A collective gasp went up from the wolves gathered on the wall. This was not war as they knew it. This was eradication. "They're not trying to conquer the mountain," Kalen said, his voice a low growl of fury. "They're trying to kill it, to turn my kingdom into a lifeless scar. Then they can walk in and take what's left." The beam shut off. The blue light in the spire dimmed slightly, as if digesting. They were testing, gauging the effect. Lyra felt it, a flinch in the mountain song, a note of pain, deep and profound where the beam had struck. It was a wound not just on the land, but in the idea of the land. The resonance she shared with the place echoed with the dull throb of agony. "We have to stop that thing," Eric said, his usual calm replaced by a bleak horror. "How?" Torvin whispered. "Arrows would bounce off that hide. We can't get near it." "The machine is a tool," Kalen said, his mind racing, his eyes fixed on the monstrous device. "It has a weakness. It must. It draws power from somewhere. It has a core." Lyra couldn't tear her eyes from the dead patch on the mountainside. The Conclave's threat had become existential. They weren't just fighting for freedom anymore. They were fighting for the right of the land to be. Her power, born of connection to living Earth, felt utterly useless against a weapon that created anti-Earth. Grandmother Yara placed a trembling hand on Lyra's arm. "Child, listen to me. That machine, it works on principles of unmaking. It severs bonds. It is the absolute opposite of your gift. You cannot fight its energy directly. To touch it would be to have your own life force drained." "Then what do I do?" Lyra asked, desperation clawing at her throat. "You do not fight the darkness," Yara said, her milky eyes fierce. "You must remind the light what it is. The machine is a leech. It consumes life. You must be a wellspring. You must give the mountain a reason to fight back, to heal the wound, to reject the death." It was a strategy of spirit, not of stone. It felt intangible, impossible. Over the next 2 days, Frostbane worked. Its beam lashed out at intervals, each time carving another gray scar into the living flesh of the mountain. With each strike, Lyra felt the land's song grow fainter, more pained. A creeping coldness, different from winter's chill, a cold of emptiness, began to seep up from the lower slopes. Plants in the vicinity of the scars wilted. A crystal stream that Lyra had coaxed to the surface for the village slowed, its water growing cloudy and tepid. The morale that had been cautiously rebuilding collapsed entirely. This was a foe they couldn't claw, couldn't outsmart. Fear turned to despair. I could see it in the eyes of the villagers who came to the keep, begging for a solution that didn't exist. Kalen was a storm contained.
He sent Eric and his best scouts on suicidal missions to try and find a weakness, to sabotage the supply lines feeding the machine. They returned with grim reports. The machine was guarded by an elite, unshakable unit. The oxen were indeed not alive in any normal sense. They were reanimated constructs, feeling no pain. The machine's armor was impervious to their weapons. During the second night, as another beam seared the darkness, painting the valley in ghastly blue, Lyra made a decision. She couldn't just listen to the mountain's pain anymore. She had to answer it. Ignoring Kalen's orders to stay within the keep's inner wards, she slipped out alone. She didn't go towards the machine. She went to the newest scar, a smoking, gray wound the size of a house on a rocky outcrop. The air here was thin and lifeless, smelling of ozone and dust. She knelt at the edge of the dead zone, her hands hovering over the gray earth. She closed her eyes and reached out with her senses. It was like touching a void. Where there should have been the hum of microorganisms, the whisper of roots, the patient song of stone, there was nothing, a terrifying silence. But at the very edges of the dead patch, she felt it, the healthy land, confused and wounded, trying to understand this new emptiness, recoiling from it. She began to hum, not a song of power or persuasion, but the simplest song she knew, the lullaby, the song of comfort, of presence, of I am here. She poured into it every memory she had of life, the taste of the apple left at the gate, the feel of sun on her face, the sound of Bren's son laughing when they found the seep, the steady, solid warmth of Kalen's presence beside her. She pushed that feeling, that memory of life, not into the dead zone, but into the living earth around it. She was an amplifier, reminding the healthy soil of what it was, strengthening its identity, its will to be. For a long time, nothing. Then she felt a faint stirring, a single, brave thread of a root of a hardy mountain flower at the edge extended a tiny, seeking tendril into the gray dust. It was like a microscopic act of defiance. Tears streamed down Lyra's face, freezing on her cheeks. It was working. Not quickly, not magically, but it was working. Life was refusing to concede. She didn't know how long she knelt there, singing strength back into the wounded land. She was so focused that she didn't hear the approach until it was too late. "A pretty tune," a cold, familiar voice said behind her, "but you cannot water a desert with a single tear." Lyra's eyes snapped open. She turned. High Seer Valerius stood 10 paces away, alone, her golden raven mask glinting in the starlight. She had no guards. She seemed to have simply appeared from the shadows. "How did you get past the sentries?" Lyra demanded, scrambling to her feet, her body trembling with exhaustion and sudden fear. "The sentries look for threats, for armies. They do not see a single unarmed woman walking the land, especially not when the land itself is occupied with dying." She gestured to the dead patch. "Frostbane's work is elegant, is it not? It does not conquer, it simply convinces the world to stop being." "It's an abomination," Lyra spat. "It is necessity," Valerius countered, her voice losing its melodic edge, turning hard. "Your very existence is an instability, a regression. The world has moved on from the age of wild, untamed gods and their unpredictable children. We have built order, law, safety. You and what you represent are a threat to all of that. You are a spark in a dry forest. We are the rain that prevents the fire." "You're the ones burning everything down," Lyra cried, her power flaring in response to her anger, a silver glow igniting around her hands. Valerius didn't flinch. She actually smiled behind the mask. "Ah, There it is, the untamed thing, the emotional, volatile power. Look at you. One taunt and you glow like a beacon. What happens when you are truly angry, truly afraid? You will lay waste to everything you claim to love. She took another step. My offer still stands, Lyra. Come with me. Let us teach you control in an environment where a mistake does not doom a kingdom. Let us help you chain the storm inside you before it breaks loose and destroys the Alpha King and all his people. It was the same offer, but now delivered not in a meadow, but on the edge of a wound made by her ultimate weapon. The threat was implicit. Come willingly, or we will unmake everything you care about, and it will be your fault. Lyra felt the pull of despair again. The logic was insidious. What if she was the danger? What if her very presence was the cause of the suffering? But then she thought of the tiny root venturing into the dead earth. She thought of Kaelin's unwavering faith. She thought of the mountain's song still fighting, however faintly. She straightened her spine, letting the silver glow around her hands solidify, not into a weapon, but into a gentle, steady light, like a captured moonbeam. You are wrong, Lyra said clearly and strong in the dead air. You think power must be chained to be safe. I am learning that power must be understood to be kind. You offer me a cage and call it a classroom. He, she gestured towards the distant keep, offers me a kingdom and calls me queen. I know which future I choose. Valerius's masked face was unreadable. The silence stretched. Then she gave a slow, disappointed nod. A poetic choice, a tragic one. She turned to leave, then paused. Frostbane's next full-power discharge will be at dawn. We will target the seismic fault beneath the main village. The resulting landslide will not just bury your people, it will shatter the mountain's heartsong permanently. The choice, as always, is yours. Save them by surrendering, or watch them die because of your pride. She walked away, melting into the shadows as silently as she had come. Lyra stood alone in the cold, the seer's ultimatum hanging in the air like a death sentence. Dawn was only a few hours away. She had run out of time for subtlety, for healing songs. The conclave was forcing a final, desperate confrontation. She looked at the dead earth, then at her glowing hands. She couldn't fight Frostbane's energy, but Yara's words echoed. You must be a wellspring. An idea, born of equal parts hope and madness, began to form. It wasn't about attacking the machine. It was about making the mountain itself an unconquerable fortress. It was about singing a song so loud, so full of life, that even Frostbane's unmaking beam could not silence it. She turned and ran, not back to the keep, but upwards, towards the highest peak, where the mountain's song was still the purest. She had to find Kaelin. She had a plan, and it would require every ounce of their strength, their bond, and their trust. The final battle would not be fought with claws and steel, but with a song against the silence, and she would need her king to help her sing it. Lyra found Kaelin on the highest watchtower, a silhouette against the bruised pre-dawn sky. He was staring at the hulking shadow of Frostbane below, a stillness about him that spoke of a king calculating the final, desperate moves of a lost game. He didn't turn as she approached, her breath clouding in the razor-sharp air. Valerius found me, Lyra said, her voice cutting through the grim silence. At the scar. Kaelin spun, his twilight eyes sweeping over her, checking for injury. She dared to set foot on my mountain? She came alone, to deliver an ultimatum. Lyra relayed the seer's words, her voice steady despite the terror they carried. At dawn, they target the fault under the village. They mean to shatter the mountain's heart. A muscle ticked in Kaelin's jaw. The raw, helpless fury she saw there was more terrifying than a roar. This was a threat he could not meet with tooth and claw. Then we evacuate. Now. We abandon the lower slopes, pull everyone into the high caves. And then what? Lyra stepped closer, her silver eyes capturing the faint starlight. We wait in holes while they methodically unmake the rest of the mountain. turn your kingdom into a gray wasteland. We run out of mountain, Kaelin, and we run out of time. What would you have me do?" The question was not a challenge, but a plea from a ruler at the end of his options. "We fight back, not at the machine, with the mountain." Her words tumbled out, the plan crystallizing as she spoke. "Frostbane works by severing bonds, by creating silence. It's a void. We cannot fight a void with force. We must fill it. We must remind the mountain what it is, so loudly, so completely, that the silence cannot take hold." Kaelin stared at her, understanding dawning. "A resonance, not just yours, a combined one. Yes, you are bonded to this land by a century of rule, of protection. Your will is part of its song. I am bonded by blood and by acceptance. Our resonance together, it's a thread between us in this place. We need to amplify it, not to attack, but to affirm, to sing a song of identity so powerful it becomes a shield." "The standing stones," Kaelin breathed, his eyes lighting with a desperate hope. "The ancient circle. They are amplifiers, anchors of the old world. Can we get everyone there, the entire village, before dawn?" Kaelin's mind raced. It's a risk, moving them in the open, in the dark, but the meadow is defensible, and the stones, if your theory is right, they could be the key. He made a decision, the weight of it settling on his shoulders. "We will do it. Torvin, Eric." His voice, though not loud, carried the force of command. The next hour was a controlled frenzy. Wolves were roused from their beds, children hushed, the old and infirm supported. There was no time for explanations beyond grim orders. They were to move, silently and swiftly, to the meadow of the standing stones. Fear was a tangible scent in the air, but so was trust, a desperate, final trust in their alpha king. Lyra moved among them, a calm center in the storm. She placed a hand on a weeping mother's shoulder, hummed a fragment of the lullaby to a wide-eyed child. With each touch, each note, she pushed a tiny pulse of reassurance, of connection into the terrified crowd. "You are part of this place. It will remember you." As the last of the villagers, over 200 souls filed into the vast, cold meadow and gathered within the circle of monoliths, the first hint of gray light touched the eastern horizon. Dawn was coming. Kaelin stood with Lyra in the very center of the circle. The ancient stones loomed around them, humming with a latent power that set the air vibrating. The villagers pressed close, a sea of anxious faces. "People of the northern reach," Kaelin's voice rang out, clear and strong, echoing off the stones. "The enemy has a weapon that seeks to unmake our home, to erase the song of this mountain from the world. We cannot fight it with blades. Today we fight with something stronger. We fight with memory, with belonging, with the simple, unbreakable truth that we are this place and it is us. You must help us. You must remember. Remember the taste of the first spring berry, the feel of the summer sun on the high meadows, the scent of pine after rain, the sound of the river that fed your grandparents. Hold those memories. Sing them in your hearts." He looked at Lyra, and in his gaze was the totality of his faith. He was handing her the fate of his kingdom. Lyra nodded. She turned to face the direction of the conclave camp, towards the yet unseen Frostbane. She closed her eyes. This was not about subtlety or suggestion. This was a declaration, a war cry made of harmony. She began to hum, the lullaby, but she wove into it the deeper song of the mountain, the grinding of tectonic plates, the whisper of deep glaciers, the sigh of roots through stone. She poured into it her own memories, of her first terrified touch of the mountain spirit, of the kind gift of an apple, of Kaelin's hand steadying her. But it wasn't enough. The song was hers alone. Then Kaelin placed his hands on her shoulders. His touch was a conduit. Through their bond, his immense kingly connection to the land flooded into her, a century of watching over these peaks, knowing every secret valley, every hidden spring, the weight of every life under his protection. His song was one of endurance, of stoic strength, of a winter that always gives way to spring. Their two melodies intertwined, amplifying each other, becoming a chord that vibrated through the very core of Lyra's being. The standing stones responded. The ancient runes carved on their sides began to glow with a soft silver-blue light, the color of moonlight on snow. The hum grew louder, becoming an audible thrum that filled the meadow. The villagers felt it, a warmth in the biting cold, a sense of grounding, of profound connection. One by one, they began to add their own silent notes, the farmer's memory of rich soil, the miner's memory of a perfect crystal seam, the child's joy of a snowslide. It was not a sound, but a feeling, a collective memory and love for their home pouring into the symphony building between Lyra and Kaylin. The combined energy focused through the stones, creating a dome of invisible resonance over the meadow, a shield woven from the essence of the mountain itself. In the valley below, Frostbane's spire pulsed with furious blue light. The great horns sounded. The final discharge was coming.
A beam of concentrated anti-life, wider and brighter than any before, lanced out from the machine. It didn't target the village, it targeted the meadow of the standing stones. The silent, deadly energy slammed into the resonant shield. There was no explosive collision. Instead, a sound like a world groaning filled the air. The blue beam splintered against the dome of memory and belonging. It was like darkness trying to extinguish a star. The sheer, concentrated presence of the mountain's affirmed identity resisted the unmaking. Lyra cried out, not in pain, but in effort. She felt the machine's hunger, its cold, nullifying will trying to gnaw at the edges of their song. It was a battle of pure essence. On one side, a void seeking to consume. On the other, a chorus declaring, "I am." Kaylin's grip on her shoulders tightened, his own strength flowing into her, an unyielding bedrock. "Hold fast." His voice was in her mind, through the bond. "Remember the roots in the dead earth." She focused. She poured every ounce of her being into the song. She sang of the tiny, defiant root. She sang of Bren's tears at the seep. She sang of the silent gift at the gate. She sang of a king who chose a stranger over peace. The shield held. The blue beam wavered, flickered. Cracks of silver light began to race through it, like living lightning combating the deathly glow. Down at the machine, confusion turned to panic. The operators had never seen Frostbane resisted. The spire's light began to strobe erratically. But the machine was powerful. It redoubled its effort, drawing on some deep, foul reservoir. The beam intensified, pressing against the shield. A few of the standing stones cracked, veins of darkness racing up their glowing faces. A wolf in the circle screamed, clutching his head as if the void was scraping at his mind. They were weakening. The sheer mechanistic output of Frostbane was beginning to overwhelm their living, fragile song. Lyra felt it. They needed more, a deeper connection, a primal source. Her eyes flew open, looking past the beam, past the machine, to the heart of the Shadowwood itself. The forest that had tried to kill her then had recognized her. It was part of this land too, a wounded, angry part, but a part nonetheless. With the last of her strength, she did something reckless. She stretched her awareness past the conclave, past their corruption, into the ancient, slumbering heart of the Shadowwood. She did not ask for its help. She offered it a memory. She showed it the forest as it once was, a place of majestic, untamed life, not a cursed execution ground. She showed it the conclave's poison, their disrespect, their use of its darkness for murder. And then she offered it the feeling of the mountain's song, the song of a land fighting for its life, a land remembering what it was. For a terrifying moment, there was no response from the forest, just a vast, ancient, indifferent silence. Then,
A tremor shook the valley, not from the mountain, from the shadow wood. A wave of raw, green power, not the gentle silver of Lyra's gift, but the fierce, wild, untamed energy of a primordial forest, erupted from the tree line. It didn't attack Frostbane directly, it slammed into the back of the mountain's resonant shield, reinforcing it, adding its own wild, defiant voice to the chorus. The forest had chosen a side. It chose life over the silent death the conclave offered. The combined force, mountain, people, king, queen, and now forest, was too much. With a shriek of tearing metal and a final blinding flash, Frostbane's spire exploded. The blue beam winked out. The machine itself seemed to crumple in on itself, its dark armor cracking, the unholy light in its core dying. The reanimated oxen collapsed into piles of rust and bone. The silence that followed was absolute. Then it was broken by a single ringing note from the tallest standing stone, a clear, triumphant chime that echoed across the cleansed valley. The shield dissolved. The villagers erupted in cries of relief, of awe, of sheer joy. They had done it. Together. Lyra's legs gave way, but Kaelin caught her, pulling her against him. They sank to their knees in the center of the celebratory circle, held in the afterglow of the ancient stones. The resonance between them was no longer a roaring symphony, but a deep, steady hum, a permanent harmony that thrummed in the very air around them. Grandmother Yara approached first, leaning heavily on her staff, her wrinkled face etched with profound emotion. She placed a gnarled hand on each of their heads. "The mountain sings a new song, children," she said, her scratchy voice thick. "A duet. It has not heard such a melody since the days of the first kings and queens. You have not just saved a kingdom, children. You have awakened its soul." One by one, the people came. Torvin, the elder, bowed so low his forehead almost touched the earth. "My king, my queen, forgive an old wolf's doubt. You have shown us what strength truly is." Bren the farmer pressed a single perfect winter apple into Lyra's hand, his eyes shining. Eric gave a sharp, respectful nod, his usual stoicism replaced by unshakable loyalty. Even Alara and Ronan approached, holding each other up. They didn't speak, but their bowed heads and the peace in their once tortured eyes spoke volumes. They were free, and they were home.